Putting others first. Even though we need time to rest, we must be prepared to meet the needs of people who interrupt our schedules. Here's Gene.
This principle comes from a very well-known miracle, probably one of the most well-known, when Jesus fed 5,000 besides the women and children. And it's interesting that, again, if you look at Matthew's account, and really all four Gospels record this event. And in three of the Gospels, or at least in several of the Gospels, two of them, you at least have some unique principles that grow out of the same event. And that's what you have in this situation, because the principle that we looked at in Matthew's account was, I call this the whole person. And it simply reads, in carrying out the Great Commission, we are to minister to the whole person, body, soul, and spirit. You see, Jesus felt compassion. Now, we read that here in Mark as well, but in that case, you really see his compassion because he healed these people. Many of them were sick, and Jesus went on to heal them, and then he saw that they were tired and they were hungry, and that's when he multiplied the loaves and the fish and ministered to the whole body, soul, and spirit. And later, Jesus used this experience to minister to their inner being when he said to them, I'm the bread of life. You had the bread I multiplied, but unless you eat of me. And so he used that illustration to minister to the whole person. But here in Mark, same miracle, we have another principle to live by, and I've called it putting others first. Even though we need time to rest, we must be prepared to meet the needs of people who interrupt our schedules. Now, when you go into Mark, he gives us some additional information and focuses on the attitude of the apostles and on the lives of the apostles and their particular needs. We read about that in chapter 6, verse 30, where Mark records, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Remember, he had sent them out 2 by 2 in pairs. And so they came back, they're reclining, sitting, and just sharing what they had learned. But they were also very, very tired, and Jesus recognized that. And so he said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while. And to show you how demanding the ministry was, we read on, for many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. Now that's heavy duty, when you don't have time to even take care of yourself physically. So, what happens? They get in a boat. We read about it. To go to this remote place, to be free from all of this pressure. So they went away in the boat by themselves to a remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them. They're hoping to go away, rest, get away from all of this. The people wouldn't let them. And so, when these people saw them going across, they ran on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. Now, you have to realize, you see, the Sea of Galilee is not that large. And so they went by land, and maybe Jesus and the apostles were just going leisurely across the lake. But what happened? When he went ashore, Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd. And again, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. Now, what happened here? Imagine you're the apostles. You've been out doing this heavy-duty work. You even have missed meals. You're tired, you're exhausted, you're frustrated, and by the way, you're not very spiritual. Not at this point in your life. So, what happens? Well, notice Mark records in verse 35, when it grew late, his disciples approached him and said, this place is deserted. It's already late. And I believe, and I'll demonstrate later why I believe, They had a very bad attitude. Send them away so they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat. Well, you know the rest of the story. Jesus went ahead and he fed them, performed this amazing miracle, multiplying the loaves and the fishes. And after it was all over, he put them in a boat, sent them across the sea, and he went up into a mountain to pray. And then we have this powerful lesson, another event in the middle of the Sea of Galilee in terms of a storm. Verse 48, Mark 6, he saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came towards them, walking on the sea, and wanted to pass by them. Now, isn't that an interesting statement? Why did Jesus want to pass by them? Well, my answer to that is that he wanted them to just experience more anxiety because of their attitude. He wanted to pass them by so that they would understand what it means to be passed by, like they wanted to do with those people that he ministered to. Now you say, Gene, where do you get that? Right from the passage. Read on. When they saw him walking the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out because they all saw him, were terrified. Immediately, he spoke with them and said, have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. And then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. Now notice, they were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. And here we have a statement that really shows where they're coming from and their attitude. Instead, their hearts were hardened. In other words, they were upset all the way through the feeding of the 5,000. And were probably disturbed that they had to be a part of it and go out and distribute it all and then gather up the 12 baskets left over. During that whole thing, as a result of that, their hearts were hardened. Why? They didn't understand what Jesus was doing and the true meaning of the loaves. So you really can't understand the principle unless you put these two miracles together. The 5,000 fed, and then Jesus walking on the water and teaching them this lesson. So here's the principle that comes, I believe, from putting those two events together. Even though we need time to rest, we must be prepared to meet the needs of people who interrupt our schedules. And that's exactly what happened here. A very, very important principle. So here's the question. How can we really keep this principle in balance? Meeting the needs of others while also taking time to meet our own needs and the needs of our families. And let me just share with you that having been a pastor for many, many years, our schedule is open-ended. Ministry is open-ended. I often say being a professor for 20 years was relatively easy compared with being a pastor out at the local church level. Because in many respects, your schedule is not your own. And it takes a lot of wisdom to be able to maintain the balance. Now there's balance. Paul referred to that balance when he wrote to the Philippians. When he said this, Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 to 5, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for his own interests. Now let me simply say that Paul verifies the fact we have our own interests. We definitely do. But what he's saying is don't look out only for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. Adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus. And that we see that attitude in Jesus in this particular event, this miraculous situation. That's a difficult balance. And as I reflect back on my own experience, First of all, there are times we have to change our plans. And in this case, Jesus said we've got to change our plans. You're tired, you're weary, but these people have needs too, and we're going to take care of them. Now, by the way, when Jesus said, let's go apart and rest a while, he also knew what was going to happen. And he also knew that in the midst of their tiredness, they're going to have to learn a lesson. So you put that all together, Jesus is not surprised by their attitude. He knew that they needed to learn. There are times, even in the midst of pressure and situations, you have to be available to meet other people's needs. But how do you maintain that balance? And I think that as I reflect back on my life in ministry, I would have to say that I didn't always maintain that balance. There were situations where I had to meet the needs of people over the needs of my family at that particular moment. There were crises, there were events, there were situations. But I can also reflect on times when I made a choice to meet the needs of others that I really could have postponed and neglected the needs of my family. You've heard ministers, pastors who've gone through ministry, very prominent people like Billy Graham. What would you do over again, they asked Billy. I'd spend more time with my family. And that's a very common statement by those of us who are in ministry. The thing is, we need to learn from our negative experiences. Those who still have life ahead of them in ministry is to be sure to maintain that balance. And if you don't maintain that balance, remember that you always have the opportunity to ask forgiveness. And I had to do that, particularly with my son. I remember one event where I came home and there was a crisis. It was a serious crisis. I think it was a matter of death or something. And Kent, he was just a little guy, but he'd been looking forward all day long for me to come home. And I told him, son, I've got to take care of this situation. And I still remember the disappointment in his eyes and in his behavior. Now, the fact of the matter is, I think he would have understood if there weren't other situations. And I had to acknowledge that. And I realized that as life went on and ministry went on, and he grew up in high school and then on to college, and he went off to join a Colorado ski team. And so I said to the elders, you know, I'd love to just take time off for a month and spend time with Kenton. And they said, go. They actually financed the opportunity for me because I couldn't afford it at that moment, and Elaine and I went. And I remember talking to Kenton one evening in the condo, and I said, son, I realize there are times when I neglected you, and I'd like to make it up to you. And he thought for a moment, and he looked at me, and he said, Dad, you can't make it up, but you can be here right now for me. You can't redo what you didn't do, but you can be here right now. Bang, the light went on. What he was saying was, just be here now, Dad. That's what I want. And out of that experience have come many wonderful communication experiences in relationship to practicing this principle, but practicing it with balance. And here's the principle. Even though we need time to rest, we must be prepared to meet the needs of people who interrupt our schedules. But the other part of that principle is we've got to maintain balance and not neglect those who are closest to us.